I was sold to die. Not metaphorically, not in the poetic, dramatic way people use that phrase when they feel cornered or overwhelmed. I mean it in the most literal, legal, and deliberate sense possible. A transaction was made, a price was discussed, a decision was reached, and the people who made that decision were not strangers. They were the same people who had sat across from me at a dinner table every single night for the past 19 years of my life. My name is Silas Vane. I am an Omega. But before you picture what that word usually conjures, the soft, luminous kind that alpha fiction is built around, the ones with magnetic sense and gentle eyes and entire rooms that shift when they walk in, let me stop you right there. That is not me. That has never been me. My designation documents, the official ones issued by the Secondary Gender Registry, carry a stamp in the bottom right corner that reads, Substandard, Low Tier, Non-Compatible for Primary Bonding. 3 phrases, 12 words, a full summary of my worth according to a system that had decided what I was before I ever had a chance to show anyone who I could be. My scent is weak, not subtly weak, clinically weak, the kind of weak that even the cheapest suppressants can manage without effort, because there is so little there to suppress in the first place. I have never caused a single alpha to pause, to turn, to look twice. I am the Omega that others in waiting rooms avoided sitting next to, not out of discomfort, but out of something worse, indifference. I was invisible in the one space where my kind was supposed to matter. So when Queen Mother Serena Croft contacted my guardian household and made her request, the Alpha King requires a bonded Omega. We are selecting candidates. There was no debate inside those walls. No one sat down to weigh options. No one asked whether I wanted this, whether I was prepared, whether I even understood what was being arranged. There was a single glance thrown my way, a quiet exchange between my guardian and the palace representative, and then the matter was closed. I was chosen, not because I was suitable, not because I showed promise or potential or any of the qualities that a bonding selection was supposed to consider. I was chosen because I was the one whose absence would leave no gap. If I disappeared from the world, no one would file a report, no one would grieve publicly, no one would ask questions that were difficult to answer. I was selected for the same reason one selects a disposable cup over a ceramic one, because losing it cost nothing. And I understood this completely. I had no illusions about it. What I also understood, what everyone in the kingdom understood, in the way that people know dangerous things without ever saying them aloud, was exactly what kind of man King Daxton Croft was, or rather what kind of man people believed him to be. 3 Omegas, 3 bonding ceremonies, 3 individuals who had entered that palace with their whole lives ahead of them and had not come back out. The official records each time cited different causes, health complications, voluntary departure, incompatibility, dissolution. But the pattern was there. People saw it. They whispered about it in the way that humans whisper about things they are frightened to name directly. He is dangerous. Something is wrong with him. Do not let anyone you love near that man. And now I was being sent directly to him. The night the palace vehicle arrived, I had already packed. There was not much to pack. A cloth bag, small enough to carry in one hand, held everything I was taking with me, 2 changes of clothing, a suppression pill strip that was already half empty because I could only afford the cheaper, shorter supply, and a photograph. The photograph was old, its edges soft from being handled too many times. The family in it, my guardian's household, was not smiling. Nobody in the image looked happy to be there. I had kept it anyway, for reasons I could not fully explain even to myself. Maybe because it was the only proof I had that I had existed somewhere before this moment. My guardian walked me to the door. At the threshold, with the vehicle idling at the end of the path and the driver waiting without expression, my guardian looked at me and said, "Silas, you don't need to come back. Not, be careful, not, I hope you're all right." Not even a look that suggested this moment meant anything at all. Just that, a quiet, relieved permission to not return. I remember registering the feeling on his face before anything else. It was not grief. It was not guilt. It was the specific, unmistakable texture of relief. The kind that lives in the body of someone who has been waiting a long time to be free of a burden. I got into the vehicle. The door closed. We drove. Inside, the cabin was cold. The seats stiff beneath me. The windows sealed shut. The world outside reduced to thin strips of passing light. Street lamps. Then fewer street lamps. Then darkness broken only by the occasional glow of something distant. I held my bag in my lap with both hands and I waited for the fear to arrive. That is what I kept expecting. The physical symptoms of it, The accelerating heartbeat, the tightening throat, the sting behind the eyes. I had been told I was going somewhere I would likely not survive, and I kept waiting for my body to respond to that the way a body is supposed to. It did not. What I felt instead was something far less dramatic and far more devastating. A deep, settled exhaustion. The kind that has nothing to do with sleep deprivation. The kind that accumulates across years of being looked through instead of looked at. Of being managed instead of known. Of existing in spaces where your presence was tolerated but your absence would have been preferred. I was tired in a way that Marna Kashal, the thought of dying, could not even disturb. It just sat there alongside everything else. Another fact in a long list of facts. When the palace gates appeared, they were enormous. Black iron, ancient-looking, lit from either side by tall fixed lanterns that cast orange light across the stone. The vehicle slowed. I heard the gates open, the mechanical groan of them, and then we passed through and the light changed entirely, brighter, more deliberate, the kind of illumination that exists to make a place look powerful. I closed my eyes, breathed in once, slowly, and that is when it happened. A scent. It came through the sealed window somehow, or maybe it did not come through at all, and instead it was already inside me, activated by proximity. I cannot explain the mechanics of it. What I can tell you is what it was. Deep, resinous, something like burning cedar, but with a warmer base beneath it. Something almost like amber or dark spice, layered and complex in a way that did not announce itself loudly, but settled instead, like a hand placed quietly on the center of your chest. This was not a manufactured scent. This was not cologne or a processed synthetic. This was raw biological alpha signal, and it was the strongest, most structured scent I had ever encountered in my 19 years of almost never reacting to anything. My body went completely still, not frozen in fear, not rigid with anxiety, just still, the way a compass needle goes still when it finally finds north. Something old and instinct deep inside me had been lying dormant my entire life, and in that one moment, without permission and without warning, it opened its eyes. I did not know if what I was feeling was a warning. I did not know if it was recognition. What I knew was this: the vehicle had stopped, the gates were behind us, and somewhere in that palace, close enough for his scent to reach me, was the man I had been sent here to die beside. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was paying attention. Nobody came for me that night. I had half expected something, a formal greeting, a cold orientation, even just another reminder of the rules I was supposed to follow. Instead, a palace attendant led me through a side corridor without making eye contact, deposited me in a room and left. No instructions, no schedule, no explanation of what would happen or when. The door did not lock. I checked, but there were 2 guards stationed outside it, and their presence communicated everything the absent lock was meant to say. This was not a guest room. The bed was narrow, the walls were bare, the single window looked out over an inner garden but had no interior handle. I could see out, I could not open it. I sat on the edge of the bed and took stock of the room the way I had learned to take stock of every new place I'd been put in, cataloging exits, noting distances, filing away small details that might matter later. 2 guards, 1 door, window reachable but non-functional. A tray of food had been left on a side table, covered with a cloth. I did not touch it that night. I was not hungry, or perhaps I was, but the hunger felt too small and too ordinary to be relevant in a situation as large and strange as this one. I did not sleep well. The palace had its own sounds, distant footsteps, the low resonance of stone walls carrying vibrations from other parts of the structure, the occasional muffled exchange between the guards, and beneath all of it, faint but present, that scent again. Not overwhelming, not intrusive, just there, the way background music is there, barely conscious but changing the atmosphere of everything it touched. I finally fell into something shallow and restless around what I estimated to be 2 or 3 in the morning. When I woke, it was fully light. Queen Mother Serena Croft arrived before breakfast. She did not knock. The door opened and she was simply there, composed, unhurried, dressed in deep charcoal with a single strand of pale stones at her throat. She was beautiful. I want to be precise about this because it matters in the way that dangerous things always matter more when they are also attractive. She was genuinely, structurally beautiful, the kind of face that photographs remember. Tall, poised, every element of her appearance calibrated, but there was something in the way she moved through a space that set off a quiet, persistent alarm in the back of my mind. She did not take in the room. She did not take in the furniture, or the window, or the untouched food tray. She took in me, and the process was clinical in a way that felt like being weighed on a scale that did not care about the number it found. Her eyes moved from my face to my hands to the bag sitting near the foot of the bed and then back to my face. The entire assessment took perhaps 4 seconds. Then she smiled. It was not a smile for me. It was internal, directed inward at some thought she was having that I was not privy to. Her lips curved and she said quietly, as though thinking aloud, "Perfect. He will look right through you." I said nothing. My instinct was to ask what she meant. Who would look through me, and why was that perfect, and perfect for whom? But I had spent enough of my life in rooms where asking questions made things worse. So I filed it, stored it, kept my face neutral and my mouth closed, and waited for her to leave, which she did, without another word, as smoothly as she had arrived. That afternoon I was escorted to the formal presentation. The hall was grand in the particular way that spaces built to intimidate are grand. High ceilings designed to make you feel small, marble floors that amplified every footstep, tall windows that let in columns of clean cold light. Along one wall, a row of court members and senior advisors stood in formal arrangement. Guards were positioned at intervals. Everyone in the room knew exactly what this was and exactly what I was, and the way they looked at me confirmed it. Some with curiosity, some with a kind of blank professional indifference, a few with something that resembled pity, though none of them did anything with it. I did not look at them for long. My attention moved immediately, almost involuntarily, to the far end of the room. Daxton Croft was standing near the elevated platform, not seated, not posed, just standing. He was tall, genuinely tall, with dark hair and the kind of jaw that stays tight even at rest. His posture was straight, carrying the specific kind of authority that does not need to announce itself. He was wearing dark formal clothing with no ornamentation, and he was not looking at me. I had constructed a version of him in my mind over the past days. I had expected something that looked like the stories felt sharp-edged, cold, perhaps cruel in some visible, readable way. A face that would confirm what the whispers had said. What I found instead stopped me in a way I had not anticipated. His eyes. When he finally looked in my direction briefly, the way someone glances at a door when they hear it open, what I saw in his face was not cruelty. It was not coldness in the predatory sense. It was exhaustion. A kind so thorough and so settled that it looked like something he had been carrying for years. His eyes were dark, and they were tired in the way that only happens when the weariness is not physical, when it lives deeper than that, in the part of a person that has been asked to keep going long after the reasons for going have stopped making sense. He held my gaze for perhaps 2 seconds. Then he looked away towards Serena and said, with a flatness that contained neither heat nor apology, "This was not my decision." Serena's expression did not change. "Many things aren't, Daxton, and yet here we all are." That was it. No elaboration. No debate. He did not look at me again. I stood there in the center of the room and absorbed being dismissed. I was familiar with dismissal. It was one of the more constant textures of my life, so the mechanics of it did not surprise me. What surprised me was the specific feeling that arrived when Daxton turned away. It was not the sharp, hot sting of rejection. It was something quieter. A kind of recognition that what I was seeing in him was not contempt but something closer to defeat. His shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with me, and somehow that made the whole thing more difficult to sit with than straightforward cruelty would have been. He left the hall before the formal proceedings concluded. I watched him go. That night, unable to sleep, I stood at my window and looked down into the garden. The lanterns were lit below, amber and low, casting long shadows across the stone paths. And there he was, Daxton, alone, standing at the far edge of the garden with his back partially turned, looking upward at nothing in particular. Not pacing, not doing anything, just standing there the way a person stands when the inside of their own room has become too small to hold whatever they are carrying. His scent reached me even from that distance. The burned cedar note was the same, but there was something beneath it now that had not been there before, or perhaps it had always been there, and proximity was finally making it legible, something dim and aching, a frequency of sadness that did not perform itself, that did not reach for sympathy, that simply existed the way old pain exists, quietly, without drama, because it has nowhere else to go. I stepped back from the window before he could look up and see me watching. I pulled the thin blanket over myself and stared at the ceiling. Sleep did not come quickly, and when it did, it carried his face with it. Not frightening, not cruel, just that, tired. Unbearably, quietly tired. 3 nights before the ceremony, Someone put something in my tea. I want to be exact about the sequence because the sequence matters. Dinner arrived at the usual time. Tray left by a silent attendant. Door closed behind them. The food was the same as it had been each evening. Plain, adequate, carefully impersonal. The tea came in a small clay cup, and it smelled the way tea always smelled in that palace. Slightly floral, slightly bitter, nothing remarkable. I drank it without thinking twice because there was no obvious reason not to. And I was thirsty, and ordinary life proceeds on the assumption that the cup in front of you is simply a cup. Within 40 minutes I knew something was wrong. It began as a warmth behind my sternum, the kind that could be mistaken for a mild fever, or the body's normal response to a hot drink on a cold evening. I noted it and set it aside. Then the warmth spread, down through my ribs into my stomach, along my arms. My skin became hypersensitive. The fabric of my shirt felt like it was the wrong texture, too rough, too present. I reached for my suppression pills and took one. Then when nothing changed, a second. The standard clinical dosage for someone with my designation. It should have been more than enough. Nothing happened. The pills did nothing. That was the moment I understood. Not suspected. Understood. My suppressants were not failing because my body was overpowering them. They were failing because whatever had been introduced into my system was specifically designed to neutralize them. This was not an accident. This was not a random health episode. Someone had deliberately induced an artificial heat cycle in a palace full of unbonded alphas, 3 nights before a ceremony that was already arranged to end with my legal elimination. The calculation was clean. If I lost control of my designation responses before the ceremony, if I was found in heat, unprotected, in a space full of alpha presence, whatever happened next would be recorded as an unfortunate incident rather than a planned death. No blame, no evidence, no complicated paperwork. Just a low-tier Omega whose designation had always been unstable, whose suppression medication had mysteriously failed, and whose outcome had been entirely predictable from the start. I moved to the floor. This was not a dramatic decision. It was a physical one. The floor was cooler than the bed, and I needed cold. I pressed my back against the wall beside the door, brought my knees up, and wrapped both arms around myself. Not because it helped the heat, it did not, but because it was something to hold on to. My mind was running a parallel track to my body, and the track my mind was on was clear. Stay rational. Do not open the door. Do not make a sound. Think. But thinking is harder than it should be when your body is actively arguing with you, when your instincts are pushing hard in a direction your logic knows is a trap, when every nerve ending is signaling urgency, and the only thing standing between you and a terrible decision is a thin, fraying thread of self-awareness. I held on to that thread. 20 minutes passed. Maybe 30. The heat built slowly, which was actually worse than if it had arrived all at once. Slower meant more sustained, meant more prolonged negotiation between what I knew and what I felt. And then there was a knock at the door. Single knock, a pause, then a second knock, not urgent, not demanding, measured, like someone who had thought about the rhythm of it before raising their hand. Silas. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I knew that voice. I had only heard it speak a handful of sentences directly, but I knew it, the particular flatness of it, the way it carried without being raised. I said nothing. I pressed harder against the wall. I know you're awake. I'm not coming in. A pause. The quietness of someone choosing their words with care. I just needed to know you were still in there. The phrasing landed oddly. Still in there. Not are you all right? Not is everything okay? Something about the specific word choice made the sentence feel less like a check-in and more like a confession of something he had not intended to confess. I don't need anything, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected it to. I know. Another pause, longer this time. Then this wasn't something I arranged, Silas. I need you to know that. I stared at the door. The logical part of me assembled the argument against believing him immediately and efficiently. He was the Alpha King. He had motive. 3 previous Omegas had died under his roof, under similarly convenient circumstances. I had no reason to extend trust to anyone in this palace, and least of all to him. The argument was airtight, but there was something in his voice that the argument could not fully account for. I had spent 19 years learning to read people in the way that someone learns to read weather. Not from textbooks but from necessity, from being in rooms where misreading the atmosphere had consequences. And what I heard in Daxton's voice was not the careful performance of innocence. It was something rawer, The sound of someone who has been accused of things they did not do for long enough that the denial has stopped feeling like defense and started feeling like grief. You cannot manufacture that, or rather some people can, but not on demand, not in a hallway at midnight, not in a voice that quiet. I stood, slowly. Every movement cost something. I unlocked the door and opened it exactly 2 inches, no more, just enough to see a narrow vertical slice of the corridor. Daxton was standing directly outside, alone. No guards, no attendants. He was still in the formal shirt from earlier in the day, collar loosened, jacket gone. His expression was completely composed. No urgency, no attempt to push the door further open, no performance of concern. In his right hand, held loosely at his side, was a suppression injection, medical grade. The kind that came from a licensed clinical supplier, not from a palace storeroom. Expensive, precise, exactly calibrated for emergency designation management. He extended it toward the gap in the door. "Take it or don't," he said. "That's your decision." He did not explain how he had known. He did not ask to be thanked. He did not try to use the moment as leverage for anything. He just held out the injection with the same flat steadiness that seemed to be his natural register, and waited. I took it. I closed the door. I stood with my back against it for a long moment, the injection in both hands, before I crossed to the bed and administered it properly. The effect was not immediate, nothing clinical ever is, but within 15 minutes the heat began to recede. Slowly, incrementally, like a tide going out. I sat in the quiet that followed and felt the absence of crisis settling around me like something that almost resembled calm. And in that almost calm, with the injection casing still in my hands, and the door still locked, and the palace still making its low, resonant sounds around me, I thought about what had just happened. Not the heat. I already understood the heat. I thought about him, about the fact that he had come alone, at midnight, with exactly the right thing, and had asked for nothing in return. I thought about his shoulders in that hall, the way they carried weight that was not mine, but that I had somehow felt anyway. I thought about his voice in the garden corridor and the way he had said, "I just needed to know you were still in there." Like that particular information mattered to him for reasons he had not yet named. I was not ready to trust him. I want to be honest about that. I was not there yet, and I had very good reasons not to be. But something had shifted. Some small, careful thing had moved from one column to another in the private ledger I kept of the world. The entry for Daxton Croft had not been updated to safe. It had been updated to something far more unsettling. Unknown. Unknown was different from dangerous. Unknown meant I did not have enough information yet. And not having enough information meant I would need to keep watching, keep listening, keep paying attention, which I realized, sitting there in the cooling silence of that palace room, holding an empty injection casing with both hands, was exactly what I had already started to do. The morning of the ceremony arrived without announcement. No one knocked to wake me. I was already awake, had been for hours, lying on top of the narrow bed with my arms at my sides and my eyes fixed on the ceiling, tracking the slow shift of shadows as the sky outside changed from black to the particular gray-blue that exists right before dawn commits to itself. I had slept in fragments. Each time I surfaced, the same awareness was waiting for me. Today was the day, not tomorrow, not eventually, today. 2 attendants arrived at sunrise to prepare me. They were efficient and impersonal, the kind of professional silence that is not unkind but is also not warm. They brought white clothing, simple, without ornament. No embroidery, no ceremonial stitching, none of the decorative details that appear on bonding garments in the illustrated histories I had seen in my guardian's household library when I was young. Those images had shown couples in elaborate coordinated dress, rich fabrics, flowers woven into fabric and hair. This was nothing like that. This was a uniform. The kind of clothing you put on something that needs to appear presentable without being mistaken for significant. I dressed without comment. There was nothing useful to say. As they worked smoothing fabric, adjusting the collar, attending to small details with practiced hands, I ran through what I knew one final time. A palace servant had come to my door the previous evening, and what she had told me had been brief, delivered in a near whisper, her eyes moving to the corridor behind her twice while she spoke. During the ceremony, at the moment of formal bond registration, a secondary document would be presented alongside the standard bonding declaration. It would be formatted to appear routine. Daxton would be expected to sign both together. But the secondary document was not routine. It was a pre-drafted rejection clause, and his signature on it would trigger an automatic legal process under Omega rejection statutes that would classify me as a dissolved bond and strip my protected status within 72 hours. Without protected status, a low-tier Omega with my designation classification had no legal standing, no claim to shelter, no right to medical access. The process had no mechanism for appeal. It was not murder. It would never be called murder. It was paperwork, the cleanest kind. I had lain awake turning this information over for hours, examining it from every angle, trying to find the variable that could change the outcome. There were not many. The only one that mattered was Daxton himself, and I had no way of knowing, no reliable way of predicting what he would do when the document was placed in front of him. The walk to the ceremony hall was long. I counted my steps without meaning to, a habit I had developed in difficult situations, something concrete to anchor the mind when the mind wants to run. The corridors stretched ahead of me, flanked by guards, leading toward the sound of a full assembly. The hall doors were already open. Light poured through them, white and flat. I walked in. The room was full, every seat occupied, every space along the walls taken. The court was assembled in its entirety. Council members, advisors, senior household staff, visiting representatives, all of them present for this, for me, for a ceremony that most of them understood the real purpose of, even if the official record would describe it otherwise. I kept my eyes forward. I had made a deliberate decision before entering not to look at the faces along my path, because looking meant registering, and registering meant absorbing, and absorbing what was in those faces. The assessment, the indifference, the performance of witnessing would cost me something I could not afford to spend before reaching the end of the aisle. I reached the altar. Daxton was already there. He was facing forward when I arrived, but when I took my position across from him, he turned, and for the first time since I had come to this palace, he looked at me with something that was not a glance. He looked at me the way you look at something when you are actually trying to see it. His eyes moved over my face, then down to my hands where the faint involuntary tremor in my fingers was visible if you were paying attention, and he was paying attention, and then back up. The expression on his face was not readable in any simple way. It was not pity. It was not assessment. It was something more active than either of those, something that required more from him than passive observation. I held his gaze because looking away would have cost me more than holding it. The high priest began. Words, cadences, the formal structure of a bonding rite. I heard them all and processed none of them. My entire attention had narrowed to a single point, the moment the document would appear. I was watching for it with the focused stillness of someone who has accepted that they cannot stop what is coming, but intends to be fully present when it arrives. The high priest reached into the ceremonial folio. He produced 2 documents. He placed them on the altar surface and stepped back. The room shifted not physically but atmospherically. That particular quality of held breath that a large group of people produces when they are all waiting for the same thing. I felt it across my skin before I consciously named it. This was the moment. This was the hinge point of everything. Daxton picked up the pen. I did not close my eyes. I had decided I would not close my eyes. He looked down at the documents. His hand was positioned above the signature line. The pen was in contact with the paper. One motion, that was all it would take. A single controlled downward stroke and everything would be set in motion. He did not move. 3 seconds. 4, 5. The room, which had been holding its breath, seemed to hold it harder. Then Daxton set the pen down. He picked up both documents, not just one. Both examined them for a moment in a way that was deliberate enough to be visible to everyone watching. Then he folded them together, once with a clean crease, and placed them inside the inner breast pocket of his formal jacket. He looked up at the high priest. "The registration will be completed through my office," he said. His voice was completely level. No heat in it, no performance of defiance. Just the flat, certain tone of someone issuing a directive that is not a request. "Both documents will be reviewed under my direct authority before anything is processed. Proceed with the spoken declaration." The silence that followed was different from the one before. The one before had been anticipatory. This one was stunned. I looked at Serena. I had not looked at her once since entering the room. Now I did. She was seated in the first tier of the court assembly, positioned where she would have a clear sightline to the altar, and she was absolutely still. Her face was composed. She was too practiced to let it collapse entirely. But something had happened to the controlled architecture of her expression. It had not broken, but it had shifted, the way a wall shifts when the foundation beneath it moves. Something in the certainty had drained out of it. Daxton turned to me. He extended his hand, open palm up, waiting without demanding. My hand was shaking, not dramatically, a fine tremor, the kind that comes from sustained tension finally encountering a moment it did not know how to categorize. I looked at his outstretched hand, and I understood in the most practical physical way that this gesture was not a guarantee. It was not safety, and it was not a promise. It was simply an offer, made in front of everyone, to take the next step together rather than alone. I placed my hand in his. His grip was careful, not tight, careful. The distinction mattered. Behind me, the ceremony continued. Words were spoken. Declarations were made. But the thing that had happened, the specific irreversible thing, had already occurred in that moment of folded documents and an extended hand, before a room full of witnesses who had come expecting one outcome and were now watching something else entirely. I did not look back at Serena again. I did not need to. The ceremony ended in the early afternoon, and by evening I had still not fully processed what had happened. I kept returning to the image of Daxton's hand open, waiting. That particular quality of patience in it that does not press. I kept returning to the sound of his voice telling the high priest that the documents would be reviewed under his direct authority. The way he had said it, without raising his voice, without reaching for drama, as though it were simply the next logical thing and he had decided it some time ago rather than in that precise moment. I did not know which of those was true. I did not know how much of what happened at that altar had been planned and how much had been decided in real time while standing in front of me. What I did know was that I was still alive, and that I was still inside the palace, and that Daxton had assigned me a different room, larger than the previous one, with a window that opened from the inside. The note had appeared under my door approximately an hour after we returned from the ceremony hall. It was handwritten on plain paper, no formal heading, no seal. The handwriting was precise but not ornate, functional, like someone who writes to communicate rather than to impress. It said, "When you're ready to talk, I'll be in the study. No obligation, no timeline. It's there if you want it." I sat with that note for 3 hours. I read it more than once, not because the words were complicated, but because I was trying to determine what they were asking of me beneath the surface of what they said. I had been conditioned, over a lifetime of being managed rather than considered, to look for the cost embedded in every offer. There is always a cost. Someone extends something, and behind the extension is a hand waiting to collect. I had learned this early, and I had learned it thoroughly, but the note had no visible mechanism for collection, no implied expectation, no language that created obligation. It was the absence of pressure, and strangely, that absence was harder to navigate than pressure would have been. Pressure I understood. Pressure I knew how to resist. This was something else. I folded the note, placed it on the side table, and went to the study. The door was partially open, light coming through the gap, warm and low, not the formal brightness of official spaces. I pushed it open slowly and stood in the doorway for a moment before entering. The room was large but lived in a way the rest of the palace was not. Books on the shelves were not arranged for appearance. Some were pulled partway out, some had papers tucked into their pages as markers. A few were stacked sideways on top of upright ones because there was no more vertical space. The desk had papers on it, but they were not organized into neat presentation stacks. They had the spread of actual work. Daxton was at the desk, jacket off, collar open, sitting in a chair that he occupied without filling formally. His posture was the posture of someone in a room they actually use, not performing occupancy. When I entered, he looked up, but said nothing immediately. He waited. I sat down in the chair across from him. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You're not afraid of me." It was not posed as a question. It was an observation, delivered with something that might have been genuine uncertainty beneath the flat surface of it, as though the absence of my fear was a data point he had collected and did not yet know what to do with. "I was told I was going to die here," I said. "Fear requires something left to lose." He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not respond. Then he reached into the desk drawer and removed a small collection of documents. He placed them on the surface between us, arranged in chronological order. I could see the dates even from where I sat. 3 separate sets, 3 different handwriting styles on the cover sheets, 3 different names on the header lines. The previous Omegas. Each time, the formal record said the same thing in different language, he said. His voice had the quality of something being stated that has been carried silently for a long time. Incompatibility, voluntary dissolution, bond failure due to alpha instability. He paused. I was shown evidence each time. Correspondence, physician reports, testimony from staff. All of it consistent, all of it clean. He looked at the documents rather than at me while he spoke, which I understood. Some things are easier to say to paper than to a person. I believed it. The first time I was devastated. The second time I started to wonder about myself. The third time I stopped arguing. He was quiet for a moment. It took me much longer than it should have to understand that the evidence was built, that all of it had been constructed with enough care to withstand scrutiny from someone who did not know to look for the construction. The thing that shifted inside me when he said this was not small. It was a fundamental realignment, the kind that reorganizes the entire structure of how you have been understanding something. Daxton was not the story people told about him. He was the story that had been built around him, layer by careful layer, by someone who needed him to believe he was dangerous so that he would never question the things being done around him. And me? I asked, why was I chosen specifically? He finally looked at me directly. Because you were the candidate whose absence would be easiest to absorb. Your designation classification, your household status on paper, you were someone the system had already decided mattered less. If something happened to you here, there would be no political pressure, no family with access to legal recourse, no public record of you significant enough to require formal explanation. He said it without softening it, which I respected. I had asked for the truth and he gave it to me unedited. That was their calculation, he continued. Mine was different. You were also the only candidate in the selection pool who arrived here already knowing what was planned and still walked through that door. I don't know what to do with that exactly, but I know it means something. The silence that followed was long, not uncomfortable, weighted. The kind of silence that forms when two people have put real things on a table and are sitting with what that means. Finally I said, so what happens now? He looked at the window for a moment, then back at me, and something happened in his face that I had not seen there before. Not the exhaustion, not the careful blankness, something that had been kept behind those things, small and careful like a light in a room where the curtains have been drawn for a very long time. Now we figure out how to take back what was taken from both of us. He said, together if you're willing, no obligation, same as the note. I did not say yes immediately. That would not have been honest. But I did not say no. Serena Croft did not accept defeat. I had known she would not, and so had Daxton. The week following the ceremony was quiet on the surface and deeply, methodically dangerous beneath it. The first incident happened on the third day. I noticed something wrong with my dinner. Not the taste, which was normal, but the response in my body 20 minutes after eating. A low-grade heaviness, a specific kind of cognitive fog that had no organic cause. I stopped eating, documented the time and the symptoms in the small notebook I had started keeping, and reported it to Daxton that evening without dramatics. He listened without interrupting, asked 2 precise questions, and by the following morning 3 kitchen staff members had been reassigned pending investigation. He did not make a production of it. He did not deliver a speech about protection or make me feel like a problem being managed. He simply acted efficiently and without delay, and then we had breakfast together in the smaller dining room as though the previous 12 hours had been entirely ordinary. The second incident came from a different direction. A ceremonial garment was sent to my room, a formal piece required for a scheduled court appearance, and when I put it on the fabric produced an immediate localized reaction along my wrists and throat. Chemical, deliberate. I changed, documented it, brought the garment to Daxton. He held it for a moment, examined the inner lining, and set it down with an expression I was learning to read. Jaw tight, hands still, the specific controlled quality of someone who is very angry and has decided that performing the anger serves no one. She's escalating, he said. Not to me particularly, to the room, to the situation. She's frightened, I said. He looked at me. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be, I told him. Frightened and escalating is more dangerous than calculated and patient. The mistakes are larger but the attempts come faster. He studied me for a moment with an expression I could not fully categorize. Then he nodded once and we moved on. The days developed a shape I had not expected. We were not performing a bond. There was no pretense between us of something warmer than what actually existed, which I appreciated more than I knew how to express. What existed was honest and still developing. A shared table some mornings, evenings in the study working through the evidence Daxton had been quietly assembling for months. A gradually expanding shorthand between us that came from spending real time in each other's company without agenda. I learned that he read in the same way he did everything else, thoroughly, without rushing, making small marks in margins that were observations rather than reactions. I learned that he was worse at sleeping than I was, that there were nights he did not sleep at all, that the exhaustion I had seen in his eyes the first time I looked at him was chronic and had been for years. He learned things about me too, though the exchange felt less even. I was more practiced at revealing nothing, and letting someone observe you accurately requires a specific kind of trust that does not develop on a schedule. One afternoon I was moving through the east corridor and I caught my foot on a slightly raised edge in the marble, and pitched forward. It happened quickly, the stumble, the loss of balance, the floor rising toward me, and then it did not happen, because Daxton's hand caught my arm just below the elbow, a clean, sure grip that stopped the fall before it completed. He did not make a comment about it, did not ask if I was all right in the slightly condescending way that question is often asked. He simply waited until I had my footing back, and then released my arm. "There's a lift in that tile," he said. "I keep meaning to have it fixed." "Fix it," I said. "Yes," he agreed, and we kept walking. It was such a small exchange. I thought about it later and I could not entirely explain why it stayed with me, why that particular non-event kept returning to my mind in the quiet of the evening. Something about the normalcy of it, the way it had contained no performance, no significance being announced. He had caught me because I was falling and he was there, and then we had continued walking. That was it. No meaning extracted, no moment manufactured from it. I was not used to that. I was used to every interaction having a ledger attached to it. The night Serena was summoned before the formal court inquiry convened on the basis of evidence Daxton had spent months assembling, testimony from 3 separate sources, and a document trail that was harder to dismiss than anything she had constructed. I was in the study when he received the official confirmation that the session would proceed. He read the document twice, set it down, stood and moved to the window, and stood there with his hands at his sides and his shoulders straight, and the particular quality of stillness that I recognized now as the way he held himself together when something was costing him more than he intended to show. I did not try to offer the right words because I did not have them. Some situations do not have right words. Serena Croft had orchestrated the deaths of 3 people and had attempted to orchestrate mine. She had spent years building a reality around her son, specifically designed to keep him compliant and isolated. She was going to face a formal proceeding for it. All of that was true and necessary and right. And she was also his mother. The 2 things existed simultaneously, and neither one canceled the other out. And there was nothing I could say that would resolve that contradiction for him. So I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk, close enough that he could see me in his peripheral vision, and I simply stayed there, present, available, not filling the silence with anything. Several minutes passed. Then he said, without turning from the window, "Do you think she ever meant it differently? At the beginning, before all of it, do you think there was a version where she was just trying to hold something together and the methods got away from her?" I thought about that honestly, about Serena's face the first morning she came to my room, the way she had assessed me and found me useful in my inadequacy. I thought about how organized the cruelty had been, how patient, how many layers deep it went. "No," I said, "I don't think the methods got away from her. I think the methods were always the point." He was quiet for a long time after that. When he finally turned around, his face had settled into something I had not seen on it before. Not the exhaustion that was still there, probably always would be. Some weight becomes structural. But there was something alongside it now, a quality of resolution, not happiness, not relief, something more durable than either. The particular expression of a person who has looked at the hardest true thing and chosen to keep standing. He looked at me steadily. "I keep thinking about something," he said. "You came here knowing what the plan was. You walked through every step of it, the presentation, the ceremony, all of it, and you never ran, not once." "There was nowhere to run to," I said. "That's not why," he said quietly. "You didn't run because you decided not to. There's a difference." I did not have an answer for that. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right in a way that required sitting with rather than responding to. He did not push for one. I had been sold to this palace as something disposable. I had walked in with an empty bag and an emptier chest, and the specific settled tiredness of someone who has stopped expecting to matter. And something had happened in the weeks since. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be summarized in a single moment, that had quietly, incrementally rearranged what I carried. I was still Silas Vane, still low-tier designation, still the omega that no system had ever found worth measuring carefully. None of that had changed on paper. But I was sitting on the edge of a desk in a warm-lit room, and across from me was a person who had just told me that my choices meant something, and for the first time in 19 years I did not feel the automatic reflex to argue with that. That was not nothing. That was in fact the beginning of something I did not yet have a name for. But for the first time I was not afraid of finding out what it was.